of the primary session around uh, one of the key topics. But primarily, if you see, the topic doesn't have that much weightage. It has like 2% only weightage as such. But then what happens is you can use this. This chapter is found primarily kind of a foundation you can consider, like foundation with respect to any kind of a data approach, any kind of a data sets that you use. You will always require something as a management layer, right? As a data management, as a core component will be part of it, right? Now, these are some of the key aspects you will be seeing. A few of the important things in the data management topics which are being assessed on or which has been over being covered. Now, a few of the important topics I can say within this is primarily the definitions you can consider. You will have to understand the entire program of CDMP. If you see each of these topics, I will say that when you're preparing, try to prepare in terms in your mind, create a like a fictional organizational. Like for example, you can create a, if you are working in an industry, then for you it will be easy to understand because you might be aware of all the different teams, management teams and all. But what happens is when you are on the other side of things, like if you're in a service company, if you're in a like a consulting company like Big Four and all, what happens is you will because you will be normally working on projects, and when you work in projects, then sometimes within the organization, what happens for your client, you might not be aware of, different teams might be there and all. And sometimes some of the projects you might be getting involved end to end. So then you get a larger picture of how that organization is there because you will be required to create the frameworks and all. But sometimes what happens is you're not part of it. So in those kind of scenarios, you need to try to understand it with respect to a context in context to an organization. So then what you should do is when you are learning or reading through any of these topics, right, you create that organization in mind, and then try to assign stakeholders, and what you can do is, while you will be able to complete this chapters one by one, in the end, you will see that all of these CDMP concepts you will be able to put in practice with respect to that organization. That is important. Okay. So some of the key chapters or key areas which I can mention as part of the this chapter is one is these frameworks. We will look into some of these frameworks, right? So that is one of the key chapter. You have topics on data valuations. What is data valuation? Why data management is important. The way they test is they will ask you questions around data management governance, just to differentiate some of these things. How do you basically define the strategy around it? What are the components of strategy? Those kind of things. There are certain of these frameworks that you will see, like strategy alignment model. You have the Amsterdam information models. Then you have the DAMA, DMBOK, the framework, the DAMA wheel, which is there. Then the environmental factors, So these are few of the things which are important. And at the end, they have this context diagram that they will be asking. So normally the context diagrams is also plays a very important role. You see that from chapters to chapters, normally there is a lot of questions that revolves around the context diagram, like what are the inputs, what are the drivers, what are the outputs, who are the suppliers, participants as part of that context diagram, right? So at a high level, because anyways, it's like an open book. So if there is anything that is coming directly with respect to the drivers, then you will be able to answer. But sometimes it happens that some answers are not very, some questions are not very straightforward. So those questions you might not be able. So try to remember maximum of the context diagram as much as possible. Then, as I was mentioning, once you start associating people, once you start associating your organization, the organization that you're creating, the fictitious organization, then that will be that will also can help you to imagine, okay, this is how it was, this is where it is. Then there is another, the DMBOK pyramid. There is also some questions around that. Sometimes it gets asked. But if you see, 2% of the exam questions comes in around that, right? So some questions that will be coming in might be kind of an extended into some of the other topics as well, right? So it's a kind of a combination that you'll see. Now, just to understand, make you understand what is this entire data management layer, right? Or, what is in the context of any kind of a framework where. So it's the kind of a core layer. You will say that, any kind of an organization, if you take in. So around that, you will be able to see that it's the core layer, right? So whenever you take any framework, right? Like if you're taking with respect to an organization, so this is a, layer you can say which is at the bottom, right? Which is the core layer of that forms your structure of any kind of your data operations, right? So, like for example, and primarily this layer, this team, the data management team, they would be their responsibility is they are the doers, you can say. They will be actually doing a lot of these things, the execution, collecting the data and all of it. They would be acquiring, processing, storing, sharing, retaining, right? So these data management teams, sometimes data management as a team might not be called, but primarily you'll see that they primarily they sit within your IT team. They have a team of data management professionals, and there might be so many different applications that you might be having in your organizations. You have so many different DBAs and all. So it's a collection of all of it. So the data management team would be taking care of all of these different types of activities with respect to the data within each of these applications, getting these managing the data flows, managing how the data is getting shared, and all. So they are, you can, in very simple terms, you can understand that they are the doers, right? So if you just read through this definition, which is what Dama also mentions, it's more about development, execution, and supervisions of plans, policies, programs, and practices. So they will be developing, executing, and supervising. So they are kind of the doers who will be doing all of these things, right? Now, what happens is they might be doing a lot of these things, but normally you'll see that in the organization, because there are so many different teams which might be there, they each of them they will be having different types of processes in the organizations. There would be a lot of different types of data stewards, database administrators. There are different applications in itself, right? So what happens is these data management teams, normally you'll see that there might be some kind of an immaturity might also be there, because every of them might be working in their own way, in their own thought process, as in like whatever they feel is right. So in that sense, you will see that they are one, though they are one of the key units, but sometimes the maturity of the data management teams, when in a single organization, also might be varying across different teams. Also within with different organizations, also definitely it might be changing, right? So they are the doers, you can say. They need to do a lot of these things, and they sometimes they create based on what is their understanding, whatever they feel is right on a more ad hoc basis. So typically in the organizations in the old, more non-formalized way kind of an organizations, you see that they might be working in their own capacity. They would be having some kind of policies and all, but normally they are very much focused into their core responsibilities. They do not basically try to understand what is happening in the other teams as a whole, as an organization level, at enterprise level. They normally are not much working on that. Now, their goals definitely. So here also some of the questions that comes in, as in like what are the goals? So here you can see that they work very closely with the business and try to provide them inputs, right? So each of these business units will have certain the business stakeholders, and then you have the data management side. You have folks who would be actually capturing this data, protecting the data, storing the data, ensuring integrity, and these kind of things and all. And now they also have a responsibility on the quality, but sometimes it is not formalized as a complete as a practice. Data quality as within it is one of the responsibility to ensure that the quality is there, but they do it in a more in a not very formalized kind of a fashion, right? So they will be they do it is one of their responsibilities, but they do not run like a data quality program, like some of the quality checks and all they might be doing and ensuring some of these things are there in a more ad hoc basis they do it. So if you see, one of few of the key business drivers which are there that, since they are the you say that any architecture, if you take any data architectures, so they are your base formation layer. So since they take in the data, they process the data and all. So they are the key, drivers or the key layers that will be there. You'll find them. So that's the reason if you see any data architectures, if your data management layer itself is not very strong, you will see that the entire architecture collapses, and I'll give you some examples. There have been so many organizations, they have been sitting with huge volume of data. The way they are handling, storing the data, they are capturing the data, processing, and a lot of these things which they are doing as part of their entire data lifecycle. So data lifecycle is very much tagged to your data management layer. So they do, if in case if they are not able to mature it the way it needs to be there, you see a lot of organizations are, even though they are sitting with a lot of amount of data, they might not be able to utilize the way it should be, right? So these are some of the things, the business drivers and goals, which are part of the data management layer that has been mentioned in the Dharma book of reference. Now, few of the other things which are there is some of the definitions of data. So this is one thing that they ask, data, what is data and what is information, right? So anything that you would be collecting, that would be useful, like names, addresses, birth dates, and all of these things are primarily is nothing but your data. And these are primarily the data sets that you have. And then when you start getting information about it, when you start, having, starts getting insights from it, that's the primarily area of information. And then you have facts about these, where you will be able to aggregate, analyze a lot of these things and start getting inputs out of it. So there are certain definitions that you will find. I'm not going through each of them. Anyways, these are something that is there. So Clisholm, he mentioned about data is a means of representation. So he mentioned this, and that is mentioned in the book. Then you have Sebastian Coleman, who mentioned that data is both an interpretation of the objects it represents, an object must be interpreted. So just remember these definitions also. Primarily, sometimes they ask you, according to Sebastian Coleman, what is data? And then give you 2 to 3 options, right? So these kind of questions, if you see, are very straightforward. So you just need to remember it's a more of a different interpretation of objects and all, how it is being there. Then these are few of the things you will find. And then the entire segment also mentions, how data is being used in the organizations, right? So as part of decision making, there are other components as part of the data entire architecture with respect to modeling, governance, stewardships, metadata, data quality measurements, managements, all of it together along with your data management layer. Primarily, they work together as part of creating the overall architecture. So these were few of the things that you will be able to see in that. Then there is a one segment or a one section you will find where there is a differentiation very clearly mentioned how data is different from some of the other resources. There is also it's mentions about the data versus information, right? So they primarily say that data is a more of a raw material of information, right? And information, in other terms, they have mentioned that data in context, right? So data is like a raw material of information that can start giving you information. Information is like a data which is in context, at a specific context. So there would be certain frameworks that have been given that will start giving you the relationship between data. So we have something called as a wisdom pyramid, right? So some of you might be anyways aware of the wisdom pyramid. So how the wisdom pyramid mentions is primarily it keeps, one of it's a made of you can consider it's a 4-layer architecture. So in this 4-layer, you would be able to see that at the bottom layer, you have something which is data. So looks something like this, right? So you have data at the bottom layer. From the data, what you will be getting is you will be getting information. From informations, ultimately you derive knowledge out of it. And once you have knowledge and everything, then there is a wisdom, right? So this is also called as a wisdom pyramid, which is at the top you have wisdom. Now, using this pyramid, wisdom pyramid, there have been some other frameworks also that has come out, right? So like, for example, a wisdom pyramid initially was 4 layered, but now in between that wisdom pyramid, they have also added one component of understanding, right? From this knowledge, and before the wisdom to have come in, you need to have a proper understanding of the knowledge that is coming in. So now the Swindoll's wisdom pyramid also has been modified. So in here, they have given some references in the book also. They have mentioned some references at the wisdom pyramid. Sometimes they ask you questions around, right? So that you can be aware of. You can read through it, what are these layers, why it is important, right? Now, as you can see in here, why data is different from some of the resources. So these are some of the reasons that you can see. Like, for example, data is, as part of the data principles. One is like that it is non-tangible, right? So it is not something, it is definitely it is there, but it's a more of an asset. It's a kind of an asset you can consider which has some unique properties, right? And obviously, now with data valuation coming in, right? So there is also one of the key aspects that comes in, and that has been defined as part of the data valuations, right? So in the data valuation area, there they have mentioned about with respect to how organizations are creating data valuation reports. And a lot of these valuation is primarily being useful. These valuation reports are useful when you are doing your mergers and acquisitions and all. So, and there is a chapter, let's see, I have that segment over here or not, where they have mentioned, yeah, so you have this data evaluation. I'll come back on that. So you have these different data valuation. So primarily, how they have defined what is data valuation, nothing but it's a kind of a difference. So you have the cost versus benefit, right? So if you subtract your cost minus your benefit that has been derived benefit, that is primarily the formula that they have defined with respect to value. So like, for example, any kind of a tangible assets, like if you have like stocks and all, it's very much easy that you can create these valuation reports. But what happens is when it comes to a lot of these non-tangible, data sets, so ultimately, when you are sitting with huge volume of data, is it like you are having a good valuation, So you might be, but there are other aspects that are, associated with. So what are those other aspects? Like, for example, what is the cost and obtaining the data? So if there is a huge cost in obtaining and storing this data, then ultimately the benefits you might be having might not be sufficient. In fact, the cost might be overwhelming the entire benefits that you might be having. Then what is the cost that you might be having of replacing the data in case if you're lost? Now, a lot of times it happens that there are attacks that happens, like say, for example, you have denial of services, DDoS, dedicated denial of services and denial of services where your entire data is now out in the open. And in case if you lost, then what is there? So have you ensured that entire loss of data happening? Have you have proper backups? So these kind of things that also impacts your valuation. What kind of an impact will happen if you lose this data? What kind of risk mitigations, from a regulatory fines perspective, or risk mitigation is primarily there are different ways how you risk mitigate. You risk accept this, you basically mitigate the risk. There are a lot of insurances that are happening now on the data losses also. Some of you might be aware of a lot of insurance companies, they basically insure your entire data that you have and the loss, potential loss. So they assess all your systems and all, and accordingly they basically insure. So a lot of organizations who have actually lost data sets because of the insurance, they get a lot of these, they are able to recover the losses coming in. So how effectively you're managing all of this is part of your data management. Definitely, the data management layer looks at these aspects also. Then improving the data from high quality perspective, how we're able to improve the data. Then you also do within this the revenue part of it, right? So for example, when you try to do data monetizations aspects, right? So this is also coming out as part of your data valuation, though there's a different aspect of looking at it. Like from these data sets, can I increase my revenue in some of these things? Not like directly selling it, that is one aspect which is there where You can also sell it that data, but obviously it has to go through a lot of these controls, consent, some of these aspect regulatory approvals and all, right? So these kind of things, if you are able to do in place, then you can also monetize by selling it off, and some of these aspects also, which is there. Like for example, if you see a lot of organizations, their primary role itself is to get surveys, do surveys and all, market surveys like Nielsen's and all, right? They do a lot of this research. And then primarily from their research, whatever the inputs that they are getting, whatever the insights they're getting, and they basically sell it out. And Gartners and all, they do a lot of these surveys. They might not be selling off the data in the raw format, but whatever the insights they're getting in from the data sets, they were basically trying to monetize it, right? So these kind of things comes under the data asset valuation, primarily that is what is being mentioned. And there are also certain kind of challenges that have been mentioned. Like for example, the primarily the valuation of the data also keeps on evolving. As you can see, it is also in contextual. It is contextual in nature. Like for example, if you see feels like when you take your data model in itself, you find your critical data elements, right? Now the critical data elements valuation will be quite higher if you see as compared to your non-critical elements, like you have customer ID, which is primarily you'll see is a point of reference for all the data assets within your organization. You have the date of birth, name, phone numbers, right? So these kind of fields you'll see has a very high valuation. So data valuation is also one of the things is it is also very contextual. It cannot be like everything, all of the data items could be allocated the same valuations. And at the same time, you'll see that it also keeps on changing, like for example, some of your some of the fields might be at a point in time might be very much important, like, and some of the fields might not be that important. Over a period of times, it might be changing. Like I'll say, a customer's preference to one product, it is today it might be important that product because it is important, but over a period of time, that product, importance might be changing or getting irrelevant. So these kind of aspects also matters and basically might be influencing your data valuation. So these are few of the things that you will see that has been mentioned, as part of the entire challenges as part of data asset valuation. Now there are certain kind of principles that have been mentioned. So that is again one area where they ask you what are the key principles as part of the overall data management. So one is like a data as an asset. Obviously, this is something all of you will know. This has been time and again has been spoken of, right? And it has different types of properties from physical assets perspective, financial assets perspective, right? So this is a kind of there are different types of unique properties associated. The value of your data cannot be expressed in economic terms, as in like you cannot say that, okay, whether it's $100, $1,000 and all. But now the way the valuation of the data is happening now is primarily with respect to assigning some kind of a quantitative value or qualitative values, right? So very similar, like one of the key aspects that goes into the valuation of the data is primarily the quality of the data. So if you can see managing the data by means of quality, so few aspects that comes in, right? So how do you are measuring the value of the data? One is on the quality aspects. What is the quality of the data? One is the availability of the data. If the data is available, those data sets are available. Other aspects also captured, with respect to are the definitions correctly captured? Is the, if you have a complete view how the data is coming in, moving in, the processes are very much defined. So these are some of the aspects, so normally when it comes to your financial reports and all, we have very clear instructions on guidelines. How do you basically create these valuation reports? But a lot of times now, this is one area. Some organizations are there who are some solutions are also available. They basically try to create these valuation reports for you and can help you understand. So that is another one area that is capturing or getting captured. But now organizations, you have chief data officers and all what they're doing it for the time being. They are creating these valuation reports, taking into a consideration these different aspects, like for example, quality being one side, as I was mentioning, availability, then adherence to the regulations, what are the regulations that are being done. So these are, if you see, there is not like a as such there is a financial value that is associated, but what organizations are doing is they basically try to align some kind of a quantitative value, right? So for example, when you give a score between 0 to 100 and start measuring it, then you can still get an idea. Okay, you know, it's like I can start adding a dollar valuations also based on the percentage, and based on the amount of data that I have, I can then create some formula and then assign certain kind of valuation. It is not exactly a dollar value amount, but you can make some assumptions and make some plots and start doing it. So these kind of things, as I was mentioning, metadata is important. Then the technological structure also plays an important role. So within that, you will find that, what are the technologies that you are having? What are the technological risk that you are having? So these kind of things comes in. And one of the other important aspect is, whether the data management, as I was mentioning, there are different teams who will be working. So is it like, it's since it's cross-functional, so you'll see that different teams are being coming in. So are you able to bring all of them together, collaborate them? So there is one of the important aspect you'll see within it. Then you'll also see it has to be that entire data management layer, there should be a single view. It has to be more of an enterprise kind of an perspective should be there. These perspectives primarily you'll see across bringing in different people from the different teams together. Then the entire life cycle management, that is again another important aspect you'll see. So within that, different life cycle characteristics, managing the risk associated with the data sets, all of it is part of it. Then what are the skill sets of the people that you have? So that is also playing important roles, because um, a lot of times data management layer actually struggles to be successful because you don't have the right set of people, because data practices, data, standards and all keeps on changing, keeps on evolving, and the people, they don't change, right? A lot of times, then it becomes very difficult. So these kind of things you will see, the diverse skills, very important part you will see part. So these are some of the principles that you will be able to see that has been mentioned in the book of reference as well, that you will be able to find. There is one section on the data as an organizational asset. So primarily it mentions that data is an asset. We should be able to assign. Now, there are different reasons that has been mentioned, because a lot of times data as a practice, a lot of times organizations, they don't understand the importance of data. So now when you start associating some kind of an economic value, some monetary value and some monetary terms, then people then start evolving, right? So in the initial years, it used to be called as like a goodwill. People in the 90s and all used to say it as a goodwill. And in goodwill, which used to be presented in your P&L statements, right? But the definition of that goodwill was not very clear, as in like how do you basically represent that in those kind of areas. So then now, as I was mentioning, there are valuation reports that are coming up, that is basically helping organizations in trying to be. And now a lot of organizations are trying to identify themselves as data driven. So these data driven organizations are primarily trying to say that all our decisions, we are primarily use data driven, as in like all the decisions, all the practices, and the it has to be data centric, has to be data driven. So that's the reason where the data which is coming in from your vendors or everything and all, we primarily base all our decisions based on this data. So that is again one of the things that has been mentioned, why data is an asset, what is the reason. And a lot of these things, I mean, might be subjective, but you can see that this is when it comes to explaining your management, these are anyways the few things that anyways you also would be, if you're working in that capacity, you might also be able to, you will be speaking the same ways, right? So these are a few of the things. I'm not just going into it now, primarily why we require data management. As you can see, uh, it's the same thing that is there because of the data challenges which are there, bringing all of them together. So, few things that has been covered now. As I was mentioning, as part of a data valuation, data quality is important, right? So, data quality, there will be it explains you about the data quality is a separate section as a whole together. But here they have just introduced data quality in that sense, like they have given some examples, and they have mentioned what are some of the key aspects with respect to what are some of the costs that are associated. They have mentioned some example of one of the incidents where IBM estimated what is the cost of poor quality data. The example is a quite little older 2016 example they have mentioned, but these are the costs which are coming in from the data which is just scrap data. It cannot be used, even though you are collecting this data, but it is not of any use because of the incorrectness and all. And there is a lot of rework that might be there. So there is a lot of efforts that goes around into it. Then what kind of correction processes that you need to do? What kind of operational efficiencies might be there? There is a lot of times organizational conflicts happens within the organization, and so also people are not aligned how the data needs to be. Everyone will feel it is to be this. One person will say X, one people will say Y. Normally, you'll see this kind of things if there are different with different departments. One team who might be collecting the data, storing the data, one team who actually uses this data. So these kind of conflicts happen. Then a lot of times happens is a lot of data quality issues also starts because of people are not really happy with their jobs. They just want to complete the work. So just like I'll give you an example. When you're filling up the forms and submitting it to the branch, sometimes what happens is if they don't see some fields which are being are not filled by you, and the system is not allowing them to move forward. So what happens is they will not put that extra effort, call you and ask your details. What they will do is they will add some just abc@gmail.com. The system will allow and they will just go ahead. So a lot of this time, you will see that the data quality also starts because people are not motivated, people are not satisfied. They just want to complete the work and just go ahead. So at that point itself, if the effort would have been done, and would have data quality, the data would have been corrected, then you'll see that a lot of these data quality issues gets resolved. And I'm saying this is happening, still happening. You'll see a lot of organizations, you feel that the data that was entered has not been validated. There's a lot of it. Then customer dissatisfaction might be also, customer itself is not, and they are not really interested in providing the right details, like feedbacks when you ask for, or surveys when you ask them to fill. They just want to complete it. They are not much interested. Then there might be opportunity cost also associated. Like, for example, there it might be giving you some inability to innovate and start bringing in new technologies as well, right? So these kind of things could be there. Compliance or fines might be there. Reputational cost might be there. So these kind of aspects might be there. And on the other side, you can see one side is the cost and the other side you have the benefits. So once you start getting high quality data, what kind of different benefits you start getting? So one is you start getting an improved customer experience, high productivity. You start overcoming a lot of these risks, which is might be from regulations, some of your internal risk teams, having a lot of these in using incorrect data for their processing, right? And ultimately, you see there is a lot of increase in the revenues, competitive advantage that you will be getting. Then what are the different types from another challenge perspective? Planning for better data. So planning for data requires also a kind of a strategic approach. So when you're planning the entire, how you're able to derive the value from data, it will not happen all of a sudden, all of the magic will happen. Obviously, you have to put in a lot of planning in that. So first of the important things is the recognition, how you're able to control, how you're able to get and create the data. That's a very important aspect. Now, that will basically also help in as part of your decision making process. Right now, these kind of things you'll see the collaboration. Obviously, it has not be like a single team. So the data office primarily collaborates with your business teams, IT leaderships, things to basically resolve a lot of these things. You cannot just think that I will do a magic all myself and you'll be able to do. So these different decisions will revolve around these aspects, the way the data is being connecting to the different business processes, the relationships that you are able to identify when you start identifying the data processes within your organization, from a technology perspective, how the data is moving, the relationships between these different processes. You start creating these process flow diagrams, data flow diagrams for each of them. So there's a lot of these identification, I will say, where you try to start identifying a lot of these things yourself, documenting a lot of these things, and you start getting a lot of these to understand a lot of these things which might be not clear. And there might be a lot of these challenges because it is not very easy. You have to get in people's time, get them ask these questions. Sometimes even if it is they are the people who are using it day in, day out, they do not have a larger picture. They are very much confined to what they are doing. So, connecting those dots is very difficult. I'll say because and then people they leave. Then these kind of things, there are so many. It's just to say, we need to do it is on one side. When you start doing it, you will start facing a lot of these kind of challenges, right? So it's these kind of programs when you start diagnosing, when you start creating a lot of these things. And I'll say a lot of the consulting companies and, IT companies and all, because they work with a very specific time limit and all, so they might not go into those detailing a lot of these things. And if you are inside the organization, then you as a within the organization, you might be knowing, so it takes time to create all of it. Though the teams might be, starting with that journey, helping in creating these templates and all, you will have to work very closely with your, respective business teams, IT teams to get these clear idea about how it needs to be done. Right. Then there is another aspect of metadata that it speaks about, which is data about your data, which is again like data is an asset. So metadata is also like an asset. So it gives you all the different additional information. So as I always give this example with respect to metadata. Like for example, if you take a bottle of water, you have this bottle of water. Now I want to get more information about this bottle of water. So how do I know this bottle is having turpentine, oil, or water, and I should be able to drink it? This label gives me all of this information. The same ways in your when you have data sets, right? You a lot of times it happens that you have been given access to your databases and all, but you don't understand what is there inside. So that is where the importance of metadata comes in. It starts giving you a lot of this business information, business definitions, technical understanding, what is the related technical terms. And there is a lot of operational related aspects also gives, with respect to how many jobs have been run, how many failures have happened, how many security breaches have happened. So these are some of the operational aspects also that they gives. So these are some of the examples that you can see: column definitions, table definitions, data models, data dictionaries, data lineage, all comes under your metadata aspects. So these types of metadata, as you can see: business metadata, technical metadata, operational metadata. We have an entire chapter on metadata itself that basically explains all of this as in more detail. So we will cover this in more detail. Okay. Now, what are some of the challenges? So data management again is a complex process. It's cross-functional, as I was mentioning. So you will have to involve all of these different teams, and it involves. So normally, a data management professional normally feels that if you're more proficient in technical aspects, I think that will solve. But that's not the case, because the data management team also requires designing skills, high technical skills, at the same time good functional skills also. So a lot of these issues that are coming in should be able to understand, interpret, and all. Now, all of it is something that is not possible to get all of a sudden. So normally these data management professionals, good data management professionals, having 10, 15 years of experience, they are the people who have seen gone through this entire life cycle, worked into each of these different stages, different phases of this life cycle, understood the challenges, have worked with the functional teams and all. So normally you'll see that these are the kind of people who have walked in that part. That is important. Walking is more important. Just understanding data management is this and that is not going to help. So normally these kind of people bring in a kind of these different skill sets, designing skills, technical skills, analytical skills, language skills, functional skills also, they have a good understanding of. So that is also comes up as thing, and it is very difficult to get these people because and keep them motivated to going ahead. That's a very important aspect. So, establishing one of the other challenges, establishing an enterprise perspective. So that is, as I was mentioning, it is not like confined within your business, so you will have to look at across all the horizontals, you have the sales team, marketing team, operations teams, finance team, audit teams, risk teams, right? So all the teams that are there across all the verticals, so it grows across, it is horizontal layer. You will be seeing that touch across each of these vertical units that are part of it. And you will have to bring in all of them, identify the processes, define the processes. So within the data management as an area, you will, which is a horizontal area, you have these vertical counterparts in your data management teams, right? So for example, some teams who would be aligned with your finance department, some teams who would be, some individuals who would be identified and would be aligned with your finance department and all. So you will see that this comprises of your entire data management. And that's normally you'll see in an organization, you have head of data management. So that head of data management primarily position is to manage this entire data management layer, and within that head of data management, you have each of these individual spokes, which includes your data analyst, your BAs, or whatever your DBAs, database administrators, and all of them will be part of it. You have these teams, data quality developers, MDM developers, and all these will be sitting within this entire data management layer. Now, the reason I'm trying to explain all of it is because in the book, you will not find this kind of diagrammatic representation, and the way I want you to start thinking is, as I was mentioning, take that fictitious organization on your mind, any organization where you are part of, and start associating someone, is doing that kind of a work. Then you will always remember these concepts. When you start associating people, when you understand, okay, this person is doing this kind of role and all. So somewhere at the mind, when you know what they are doing, and if there is a question that comes in your exam, then you can imagine that person in that context. Okay, this is the question, this is the scenario. Out of these four people, who should be doing it, right? So this will only help you to, clear the exam. That is what I can say. Remembering word to word all the sentences might be sometimes difficult, right? Then the other things that comes in is the data life cycle. So data life cycle is the phases, right? From the point where the data is being collected to the point where data is being stored and transformed, right? If you see this entire example that I was showing you over here, right? So this is the life cycle: the acquisition, analysis, processing, storage, sharing, retention, and disposal. And different ways are being shown, right? So in Dama's book of reference, you'll see that the data lifecycle is mentioned clearly. Now, data lifecycle in different words, you can just understand. It is very similar to like your human life cycle, like we are born, then we grow, then we mature, we learn a lot of these times, and then ultimately we keep on aging and then we pass away, right? Similarly, you have the product life cycle, right? It starts with, and that's the reason of data products is coming up as a area, when now you can see that just like as a product has a life cycle, right? From the point when of that ideation phase happens, you start with an ideation phase. Okay, this is a product that needs to be created. You do a lot of these, brainstorming, identifying what are the features needs to be there and all of it. So similarly, you'll see that data goes to each of these life cycle, right? You see this, that starts with the planning phase, what are the pointers that needs to be there. Then you see that entire design happens, prototyping happens. You see that there's a lot of, you do a lot of the sample testing and all, Then you do some of these things like sometimes you release out and try to see people's take on that, get feedback, improvise on it, right? And you enhance them, start productionizing it, putting into those components, and then as it operationalizes, it grows. And then sometimes once the purpose of the data is completed, then you also have to delete the data, right? So that is your entire life cycle. So that is also mentioned over here, the creation and the usage of these data lifecycle points at any point in time, you should be able to understand. And if you take any of your data privacy regulations also, like if you see records of processing activities, which is ROPA, which is done mentioned by a lot of these, privacy regulations, it clearly you have to outline which is your collection point, which is your, asset analysis phase, storage phase, and all. These five phases have primarily actually mentioned, the data deletion also. So these kind of things you'll see as part of the data life cycle. And the focus of the data management has certain kind of implications also that has been mentioned. So first is the creation and usage of most critical points. So you need to identify, like for example, data sharing is one of the very critical points, because you'll see that, data sharing is a stage where you are actually sharing your data with other stakeholders, with your vendors, third parties and all. So you have required to have these contracts, vendor contracts and all, so that they don't end up spilling that data with outside world and you're losing. So you need to identify which of the critical points. It could be a collection point itself. The collection point itself is the most critical component. So you identify that. Then you ensure that the data quality must be managed throughout the entire life cycle, right? Across each of these layers, you have the data quality checks and processes inbuilt that helps you to manage the data quality across your entire life cycle. That is very much important. Then metadata also has to be captured throughout the life cycle, because data will keep on changing forms and shapes. It goes through a lot of these uh, you know, transformations, you can say, right? So then it becomes very much important to understand what additional data sets it's coming in. Is there any data sets that is moving out, right? So these kind of aspects. Data security, very much important. The data leakages controls, data leak controls might be there. You might have to do data encryption, masking, all of anonymizations and all. So all of it is something that is part of it. Then you need to identify your critical data sets and try to focus your data into that. Your entire, whatever is the thing that you want to do, you want to try to focus your attention more on the critical data sets. Now, based on that, what you see, the different types of data might be there. So you'll see these different types of data, because you have transactional data, you have reference data, master data, metadata, category data, resource data, event data, detailed transactional data, right? So different types of classifications of the data which might be there. So one of the other important aspect which you normally do, which is your part of a data classification, where you try to classify, categorize the data in such a way. So the categorization, or normally the classification, if you say, no, I always say that whenever you're doing data classification, and data classification again is very loosely understood, I'll tell you. Some when you look at data security solutions, they will classify data. They will say we do have data classification power, and I want to classify the data. So they will classify data as what security is, confidential data, or sensitive data. So these are some of the things: private data, public data, internal data. So these are security based classifications that security solutions does. Then if you look solutions which are more metadata specific, like for example, which are metadata solutions. So they used to classify data in like domain specific. So they will say that, okay, this data is for finance, this data is for marketing, right? So that is another way of classification, definitely. Then when you look at privacy solutions like OneTrust, Big Ideas and all, they will say that we want to classify data based on the privacy classifications that have been mentioned by some of the regulations, like what is personal data, what is sensitive personal data, what is personally identifiable data, what is non-personal data, right? So if you see data classification when organizations have to do, right, you will have to take in all these classifications. So normally classifications could be of four types. One is on the domain in which they belong to, which are the data domain subject areas. One is on type of data, like for example, the transactional data, whether it's reference data, whether it's master data, metadata, and all. That is another type of classification. On the security side, you can define classifications. You can do the, privacy. Now, all of these classifications, there are respective leads who should be able to do it. The data is remaining the same, but the classifications for each of these, like security office will define it in their way, privacy office will define it in the privacy terms. You have the metadata management team who would be doing it based on the classes and all, and you have the other teams, the analytics team, who might be defining it in transactional, reference, master, and all. So you have these different people who should be creating these classifications and helping you in understand. That is primarily, you'll see the data classifications, the essence of data classifications that has been mentioned, right? One of the other important aspect is the commitment from the leadership, as we have mentioned. It's not like very easy, as you can see, there is so much things to do. So that management commission, the management's alignment and the vision has to be there. So that is what it speaks about. You can see that the CT chief data officer can guide as part leading the data management activities, but there is a lot of the things that are to be done by the doers in the organizations, right? So you can see that that's the reason, that it has to be driven from the top, as normally everyone says that. And it actually helps, because once there is a push from the top, you see everyone starts prioritizing these kind of initiatives within the organization. That's the most important thing. And ultimately they know that it is important because there is a lot of benefits that as an I might be facing a lot of challenges now, so I can start resolving a lot. Then there are certain kind of regulations that have been mentioned. Like for example, you have Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which is primarily focusing more on the controls with respect to accuracy and validity of financial transaction data. Then you also have the Solvency Act, which is there. So it also mentions about data lineage, quality of the data, right? And data privacy regulations are there. It comes in. Some of you might already have implemented the BCBS 239 regulation. That also speaks about the data lineage, the way the data needs to be handled, how it needs to be stored and all. So a lot of times when you see there were projects that you will be coming across which mentions these terminologies, more or less, it is more about data management, effective data management across each of these areas that it speaks about, that is being mentioned. So some of these aspects on the data management strategy, we'll see that as part of, so strategy at a very high level, you require to have the goals defined. So you can say that what are the strategy steps that you need to identify, right? So when you are defining and or you want to implement the data management strategy, so it basically starts with a vision and mission statements. There are certain kind of business cases that you need to identify, use cases, as so that you can start measuring it. What are the guiding principles, values, management perspectives that has to be there. The mission statements has to be come in. So these are primarily when you start creating them, right? What happens is the goals are very clear. Like for example, you have SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time bound. So these goals, you define it as short-term goals and long-term goals. So these kind of things together can start helping. And then you define a lot of these descriptions of the data management components, you prioritize them. And then you identify what are the deliverables, like a charter. So a charter will have the overall vision, the business goal, business case, the goals, guiding principles, and all. You have the scope statement coming in, which will have some goals with respect to a time horizon, or short-term goals versus long-term goals. You have the implementation roadmap, which has to be a very detailed roadmap as a whole. Then the next segment primarily speaks about the entire frameworks which are there. So as I was mentioning, there are different types of frameworks. So you have the couple of frameworks that have been mentioned. So you have the strategic alignment framework. So let me just see if I can get the strategic alignment framework in here. So these frameworks are also sometimes there are questions that are comes in along as part of this where they ask you questions around it. Let me just quickly see if I can have that. Just a minute. Yeah, so you have the strategic alignment framework first. Yeah. So in the strategic alignment framework, there were two persons, Henderson and Venkatraman, who basically mentioned. So what they mentioned is in that alignment framework, the information is mostly associated with your business strategy, and data is associated with your business technology and the processes around that. So there are four fundamental domains of strategic choices you can consider on that. There is a business strategy, there is information technology, IT strategy, you have organizational infrastructure and process strategy, you have IT infrastructure and process strategy. So this is a strategic alignment model. So there is how the business and IT strategy they work together along with your operational strategy. That is how it been defined or has been mentioned. Then additionally, you have something called as the Amsterdam information model. So this is again one model that sometimes they ask questions around that. So this Amsterdam information model, primarily what you have, this was again defined by a few people. That is Apcover, Mays, and Trojans in 1997, they came up with this model. So it also takes a strategic perspective on the business and IT alignment, right? So there are 9 cells, as you can see. There is a middle layer that focuses more on the strategy and tactics, includes your planning and architecture, but it basically necessitates the entire information communication that is there, Then both this strategic alignment model and AIM frameworks, you can see that there is a kind of a business and IT strategy and business operations and strategy that comes in together as part of it. And then you also have the Dharma wheel, which is, as you can see over here. So which basically has the data governance layer in the middle. And you have all of the pillars like data modeling, data storage operations, data security, integration, operability, document content management, reference management, data warehousing, metadata, data. So these are like the different chapters anyways they have gone through each of these areas they have mentioned. And as part of that, what they also had was primarily the entire hexagon, So this hexagon which they create is primarily the environmental factors, So normally what happens is, what Dama mentioned is there are a lot of different types of environmental factors that might be influencing the model. So it is important to understand those, what are these environmental factors also. So it comes in over here, something like this. So in this the environment factor primarily describes this relationship between people, process, and technology. And it basically involves that, right? So different people have used these knowledge areas, context diagrams together, and then they have applied it something together as a whole. Now, what they have created based on that is the context diagrams, which is your knowledge area context diagram for each of these areas that they have created. So this knowledge area context diagram, normally they have created, shown as the structure as part of the entire layer, right? So it basically includes what is the definition, what are the goals, inputs, activities, deliverables, who are the suppliers, who are the participants, who are the consumers, what kind of techniques, tools, or metrics that you're going to use as part of it. So they have provided definition of each of them, right? So what you will be considering them. And then you have something called as a PDCA as an approach, which is planning, development, control, and operational, right? So this PDCA, these are primarily the activities, as you can see. So each of the activities that you will be putting in here, they will see there is a, in bracket, it will be mentioned whether it's a planning activity, whether it's a development activity, whether it's a control activity, whether it's a operational activity. And based on that, you also see that the roles and responsibilities that I'm mentioning, who is a supplier, consumers, right? So this is another model that has been mentioned here. And then lastly, they have mentioned a kind of a pyramid model, which is also called as the icon pyramid, right? So this basically is also similar to your whatever the frameworks that we have seen. In this, primarily the icon pyramid, what they have done is they have divided into different types of phases. So normally it uses this functional areas only, Danbox functional area, but what it does is it divides this entire objectives in achieving it into phases, right? So in phase one, what you should be focusing on, like for example, you can see that data integration, operability, data storage, security, and data modeling. These are the things that you should work on phase one. Phase two, you should start working on the data architecture, data quality, metadata. Phase three, you can see you have. So they have divided it into phases so that when organization wants to do it, right? So one of the key question that happens is how to start, how to do a lot of these things, all of them together. So some organizations, if they have that much capacity, they are able to achieve all of it in one go by having different teams aligned to it. But on the other side, you will see a lot of times they do a more of a journey and break it into these different phases. So then this helps you to understand how you can, create your year by year plan about all of it. Okay. So just a minute. Sure. Yeah. So there comes the last thing where, they have brought in all of it together. So in here, they created the functional, the Dharma, so the entire data governance layer. That is a kind of a circle that circles the entire layer, right? So bringing all of this together, this is the diagram that represents all of it. So you have the entire life cycle management within it. You have components coming in together. And across the 11 knowledge areas of the that we want to look into, it basically brings all of them together, and the data governance layer provides directions and oversight. You have the data architecture who provides the blueprint. You have the data modeling and designing. creating the data models, data storage operations, your data security. So each of these areas, then we will be going into each of these chapters one by one. Okay. So in each of these sessions, they have detailed out each of these areas, but this is primarily the first thing that they have covered as part of my data management layer or chapter that you can see. Okay. So I think I'll stop here then. Any questions that you have, you can use the Q&A, I think, for typing in the question. I think I was not able to unmute you. This happened a little weird because this last time I, scheduled a webinar. This time actually I scheduled a kind of a meeting, I think, or an event. And I think that basically stopped. But you can use the Q&A. There is a Q&A tab. You can type in if there is any questions on this. You can go and read through it. Now, since you have a bit of idea of this, what you can do is you can read through that entire chapter. I think you'll definitely be able to complete this, this is not a very difficult chapter. After going through the session, at least now you'll be able to understand the concepts. And I will say that take that example which I was mentioning, imagine it from an organization perspective, try to associate people to it, then you will always remember. Uh, the way, it happens that if there is a song that you hear, you're able to visualize that song with respect to the actor actresses, because and that is makes you to remember that song more. So if you're able to do that with respect to the book, then, you will not forget this. Okay, so I'll take a pause, stop here. We will stop here and then we'll meet in the next session. You can reach out to me. You have my thing. So yeah. Yeah, the deck I will share with you. The presentation deck I'll share. I'll have shared the recording also. I'll stop recording this. I'll share the recording also. And I think next session also.